Good morning, everyone. Perek Gimel Mishna Daled. Amed Dvarim Amurim. This Mishnah Daled is going back on the Mishnah before. The Mishnah before stated that there will be times that when a partner separates Truma, that the Truma that he designates is not going to be fully effective because of the fact that his partner we cannot presume that his partner consents to his separating Truma for his part. And in those situations, the Truma that was separated is half Truma, half not Truma. So when do we say this? The Shaloi Diber, when the other partner did not speak. That means the other partner never told his partner he can separate Truma for him. And therefore, under the conditions where we cannot presume his consent, and we don't have it, and therefore we say that only part of his Truma works. However, if let's say even in the conditions where this person that separated Truma, the partner separated Truma, we know is not proficient in the laws of Trumas and Isris, which is a condition that tells us that we cannot presume the other partner's consent for his separating of Truma. If the other partner told him straight out, he spoke to him and he told him that he could separate Truma for him, then the halacha is that the Truma will work for both of them. And in that situation, the first Truma is a good Truma, and the second Truma doesn't count because the first Truma worked. Because once he told him, he spoke, he gave him permission to go ahead and do it, and he has the power to do it. So our Mishnah previously said before that the first Truma may not be effective is because the other partner never said anything to him. Avol Hirsha es ben Beisai, Oy es Avdoi Shevchasei Litroi. But if, let's say, a person gives permission to any member of his household or to his servant, his slave, or to his maidservant to separate Truma, then the Truma works. The Mishnah is basically telling us, as something that we've already mentioned before, is that if you go ahead, if you give a person permission to separate Truma, that person can separate Truma. And the Mishnah talks about a case of a member of your household, which would be the typical case of where he would give permission for someone to do. You can't necessarily presume that he gives permission to that member of the household to do it, but he gives him permission, it could work. Not only that, permission even works, separate Truma, if you get the permission to your Eved Kanani or Shivcha Kananis. That means to a Gentile slave or Gentile maidservant. Those slaves, actually, you could give them the power to separate Truma for you. Now, we know from the first Mishnah that we learned that a non-Jew cannot separate Truma for a Jew. Here we're talking about a Gentile slave, what's called an Eved Kanani. The Torah does recognize the possibility of owning a slave. And the thing is, though, that slave that's owned, that was a Gentile person, and that person that became a slave, actually they become pseudo-Jewish, they become partially Jewish. There are certain mitzvahs they're obligated in. And meaning that they have become obligated in certain mitzvahs, they do have the power to separate Truma for you if you give them permission. So that's what our Mishnah is saying. Our Mishnah is saying that there are different people, whether it's a partner or even a member of your household, that the conditions may not be there to presume that you consent to what they're doing. But if you actually do tell them to do it, then it's going to work. Okay, now, Mishnah continues. Bittel, let's say after you gave permission to the person to separate Truma, you took it away. Bittel, you nullified the authorization to do it. If he nullified the authorization before the person that you previously authorized separated the Truma, so you basically took away his power before he separated the Truma, then the Truma separates, isn't going to work. But if, let's say, it was already after the fact, after he separated the Truma, that's when you nullified the authorization for him to do it. The Truma is going to work. When he separated the Truma, he was authorized, he had the power, it's done. You can't undo it. Okay, Mishnah continues. Hapayalim, Einlam Rishus Litraim. Laborers, people that you hire to work in your produce, they do not have permission to go in and separate Truma. Although you hire them to work with the produce, that does not mean that you gave them permission to separate Truma. And that's where Mishnah says, Hapayalim, Einlam Rishus Litraim. The workers, people you hire to work in the grain, do not have permission to separate Truma, chutz min hadoyrei chais, except we're talking about the treaders. Treaders means that they were hired to tread the grapes to make wine. Bartanura says we're talking about a very specific case here. And the case here we're talking about is that these treaders, these workers who are going to be treading on the wine, they are chaverim. Chaverim is the term that's used for people who are proficient and careful when it comes to doing things in a state of purity. And the person who's hiring them is an amaretz, an ignoramus, a person who is not careful in the laws of, he's not proficient or careful in the laws of tumah tahara, of purity and impurity. So much so that the sages actually decreed upon such a person that if he touches something, it can make it impure. Now, we studied previously that we don't want the grain that truma is going to be separated from, we don't want it to become tamei, because we don't want to give a kayin truma that's tamei, because then the only thing you can do with it is burn it, use it as a fuel, but you can't eat it. So one is not supposed to be separating truma from something that's impure. Now, the problem is here that when we talk about these grapes, we have a concern that the amaretz may come to touch these grapes or the wine that's being made and make it tamei, and then truma is going to be separated from something that is impure, something that is tamei. Now, here in this case, this amaretz, this person who is an amaretz, and he knows that he will make things impure, he didn't just hire any worker. He hired chaverim. He hired people that are proficient and scrupulous in the laws of tumah tahara. The fact that he hired those kind of workers is a proof that he wants to make sure that the truma is separated in purity. He wants to make sure the truma is done right. He knows he can't do it. He knows anybody can't do it. He needs specific people to do it. That's what we assume. That's how we understand why are these people. All right. So if this is why he hired these workers, specifically because being that they are careful in the laws of tumah tahara, therefore we understand he hired them for the purposes of separating truma while the produce, the wine, whatever it is pure. That's an assumption that we make, and that assumption tells us that he gave them permission. That's why he hired these people. He hired them for them to do the truma right. So therefore, they don't need his specific permission to be able to separate truma. It's presumed, okay? And therefore, they have the permission to do it. Now, the Mishnah concludes, Shein metamin asagas miyad, because the owner makes the vat, meaning the wine press where the wine falls to, they make it immediately impure. So Bartanura explains what it means like this. It means that these amaretz, they hired the chaverim to separate the truma. And they did it because they wanted to make sure that everything was done properly. The truma was separated in a state of purity. There's only so much we can assume they're going to stay away from the wine that's pressed in order for the truma to be okay. There's going to be a certain point of time they're going to go touching this vat where the wine is coming into, where the grapes are sitting. There's a point that they're going to go ahead and do it. Clearly, the fact that they hire these kind of workers means they don't want to touch it. They don't want to get involved. They don't want to mess things up. There's a certain point where they're going to start touching everything because they're going to assume that these workers who are careful in the laws of tumah tahara, they're going to assume at a very early stage that they have already separated the truma, and now they can go touch anything they want. That's the issue that we face. The Bartanura explains that these owners, when they basically see the workers start treading, which Bartanura says they tread in a north-south direction and then an east-west direction. All they got to do is one row in each direction, which already begins the process of squeezing out the wine. Then already they say, the wine's out. They assume that these workers who are chaverim have already separated the truma, and I can touch anything that I want. That's their assumption. And therefore, if the chaverim don't immediately do something to take care of this issue, there's going to be a problem. We're going to be stuck with everything becoming impure and then having to separate truma from things that are impure. And therefore, when the Mishnah says that the darachos, that these people who tread, they have permission. And they have permission because the owners who are ignoramuses or amaratzim, they make the vat, meaning the wine where the grapes are being pressed, they make that impure immediately, means to say that being that these owners assume that once you again did a tread in a north-south direction, east-west direction, they assume that you've already separated truma shortly after that happens. that's what you have to do. You actually have to now separate an amount that would be truma in the future for all these grapes and the wine pressed from them, in order to make sure that you will be separating a truma from things that are pure. Meaning, once they go ahead and do this treading back and forth, they need to go ahead and actually take a certain amount of grapes that will be truma for the future. Now, what's important to point out is that when they, let's say, we're saying that once they go ahead and they do this, they tread in both these directions, they have to make sure that they separate enough from this that's going to be truma before the owner comes and starts touching everything, making everything impure. Now, at this very early stage of the game, where they've only started doing a little bit of treading, if they're going to take truma from what's already there, there's a problem, because even if, let's say, they're taking truma from some of the wine that's already been squeezed out, but you have all those other grapes that are already waiting to be pressed. Those are unprocessed grapes, which we studied earlier, that you're not supposed to go ahead and take truma from them or for them. You're not supposed to take from processed for unprocessed. You're not supposed to do that. If you're going to go ahead and separate from some of the wine that already came out for everything else, but everything else hasn't been pressed yet, and it's going to be pressed. So it's not processed. If it's not processed, you're not supposed to separate from processed for unprocessed, from the wine that for the unprocessed grapes that are still waiting to be pressed for wine. And therefore, when we say that these workers should immediately separate truma, it doesn't mean that what they're separating, they're designating as truma then, because it's too early designated as truma. But it means you're going to separate an amount that would be designated in the future for the truma, for the rest of for everything else that's going to be processed here. And you're going to do it now, so that when you actually the truma, that truma will be from wine that is pure, because you took it out of here before the owner, who is an Am Haaretz, who we assume is Tameh, is going to make everything Tameh. So the Mishnah is saying that at a very early stage, they have to separate the amount that would be truma for the future, to make sure that truma that they eventually do designate should be from wine that is pure. But they're not going to designate it now because it's too early, because that would be designating wine for unprocessed grapes. So the Mishnah is concluding by saying that although workers cannot presume that they have permission to separate truma, but if it's these wine pressers, these shredders, and again, in a situation where the owner is Am Haaretz and the workers are chaverim, where he hired them to make sure that the truma is done properly, being taken out from pure wine, then in order to make sure that they get their job done properly, as soon as they start shredding some of the wine out, they need to take that wine and just take it out of the vat, so that they can later designate it as truma for the rest of the wine that's going to be processed here. Now get to the Sefer HaMitzvot. Mitzvahs lo yisaseh sholech al oif tamei. Prohibition against eating non-kosher birds. Shenema, as the pasuk states, "Ves ela teshaktu min ha'oif." These are the things that you should consider as an abomination from the birds. Lo yachlu, they may not be eaten. Okay, now in the Torah, this is interesting. When the Torah talks about the non-kosher birds, it lists them, gives a list of different birds. We don't necessarily have a tradition anymore about which birds these are. And therefore, there is a way to determine what is considered at least there's a certain way of determining certain birds for sure, to know that they are non-kosher. Nowadays, any bird that we eat from has some kind of tradition that says this is a kosher bird. But there are certain signs that our sages give for a non-kosher bird. And the Chavetz Chaim explains, any bird that divides its feet when a string is stretched for it to walk on. And what does it do? It places shtei etzbos lakan, shtei etzbos lakan. It basically takes two of its talons on one side and two talons on the other. That's how its feet, right? It's got 2 feet, and basically it's got, I guess we call it talons or claws on one side. Its feet on one, grabs its feet on one side of the string and then puts its foot on the other side of the string. In that situation, instead of instead of both of them going on the string, if the string is going this way and the bird stands with both on the same side, what happens is somehow or another the bird has talons on one side and then talons on the other side. I'm not exactly sure how to explain it, but whatever that may be, that if that is what the bird does, or it actually catches something in the air and eats it in the air, hareza dairis, that is considered a bird of prey, betame, and it is impure. So that is a sign that is given to figure out which birds are non-kosher. At the same time, even if, let's say, you have birds that don't fit that, without a tradition nowadays that it is the kosher species of bird, we don't eat it. And any bird that lives amongst non-kosher birds and resembles them, that's also a bird that you assume is not kosher. One who eats the volume of an olive of flesh of a non-kosher bird, like it, receives lashes. The eggs of non-kosher bird are forbidden to eat from the Torah. This applies in all places at all times, both by men and by women. The one more short mitzvah. Prohibition against eating a non-kosher fish. As the pasuk says, these fish mentioned before that are not that are lacking the signs of being kosher, they shall be an abomination to you. You should not eat from their flesh. You want to know if a fish is kosher or non-kosher. If it does not have fins and scales, then Allah is it is tamei. It needs to have both in order to be kosher. One who eats needs to have fins and scales in order to be kosher. And anybody who eats the volume of a olive of these kinds of fish, like receives lashes. This applies in all places at all times, both by men and by women. In case I left it out by the non-kosher birds, this line, it says that they're also both by the non-kosher birds and non-kosher fish. It applies in all places at all times, both by men and by women. Have a wonderful day and a wonderful Shabbos.